Hello everyone, welcome back to Pass the Aux Cord, a channel where Toast is very happy to be here. And welcome back to Album of the Day, a series where we go ahead and take a look at a great album that deserves your listening ears. Today that album is going to be Welcome Home by Aries. Aries is an artist, producer, rapper, singer, and YouTuber who has been either making content online or releasing self-produced music since around 2016. He initially gained popularity by remixing popular hip-hop songs on YouTube, as well as doing production videos where he would recreate the instrumentals of a popular song, as well as doing creative experiments with music production. During this time, he would periodically put out individual self-produced singles such as You're Not Precious and Dead Man Wonderland, gaining him even more attention, a stronger fan base, and a big anticipation for a larger body of work that he would eventually produce. Then coming in 2018, Aries would release Sayonara, the lead single for what would eventually be that larger body of work, with a fantastic music video and much success and popularity. That larger piece would eventually be Welcome Home, the album we're talking about today. Immediately, this record became a hit for fans and newcomers alike, and since then, it has only been up from there. Aries has toured to thousands, started a clothing line, released yet another album, and seems to have even more in the works based on a recent single and the vlogs that he's been putting out recently. While Welcome Home might not currently be his most relevant piece of work, given that it did come out all the way back in 2019, I think it's a great time to go ahead and reflect on the slightly more humble beginnings where he was just getting started and showing us the musical abilities that he has. It seems like a new era is starting for Aries, and I'm very excited to see where this all goes, but reflecting on the beginning here is a great point to start. So let's take a look at how impactful this moment truly ended up being. Aries, particularly on this release, is typically slotted into the emo rap or emo trap genre that I'm sure we all remember making a huge splash around this late 2010s era with artists like Lil Peep and eventually the huge stars that were XXXTentacion, as well as Juice WRLD, having huge hit songs at this point. And this wave is one that we're still feeling the aftershock of in some ways. The categorization does simplify things a little bit more than I would say is deserving, although it is a fair one for the most part. The dark and vivid sound, the moody singing, the catchy hooks, and especially the lyrics that we'll get into more later really do fit the bill. And while this album is reminiscent of the genre and much of what was already put forth, he really takes things to its logical peaks and creates something that is beyond that genre in a way, especially including influences of pop and singer-songwriter music, as well as taking a heavier emphasis on the emo side of the emo rap genre, and it makes for an easier to approach and more instantaneously likable sound. His vocal presence on the album isn't exactly pushing to a very raw or emotional place, but there is personality and charisma even in his smoothness. The blend makes for incredibly catchy songs that still feel somewhat depressed, fitting of the genre, but still have a bouncy and poppy feel to them. The way this album was produced shows a ton of skill and shows his ability to make something unique in a sound that was already becoming very oversaturated. The instruments sampled and placed into the mix here, whether it be something as simple as a piano melody or something as complicated as distorted sound effects, are just so perfectly placed all throughout. To fans new and old, it's pretty clear that Aries is a perfectionist, and that's likely why we hear snippets that never end up getting released so often, as well as such large gaps between album releases. It's that perfectionism that makes Welcome Home a stunning listen. There's a perfectly consistent vibe in Welcome Home, and one that you would have a very hard time finding any imperfections in. I could not blame someone for saying that the lyrics of this album fall into tropes of the time. Much like a lot of the rappers that we saw popping off at the time, Aries is talking about things like heartbreak, drug use, depression, mental health issues in general, and the vicious cycles that all of those things can put you in, and the negativity of it all. At the same time, there seems like there's somewhat of a trademark signature style that Aries brings to his writing that's very noticeable. Things are very vague, and it seems like it's an intentional decision. To compare compare again to other people in the genre, such as notably Lil Peep, it's very easy to tell what's typically going on in any of those songs. It's almost always very blunt and forward-facing with meanings, and that's something that Aries has for a few lines typically in each song, although much of it is shrouded in a shadow of poetic, nondescript words that bring some imagery to mind, or at least an idea, but it's not clearly stated any kind of narrative much of the time. It's clear on Welcome Home that Aries is struggling with some dark thoughts, having relationship troubles, and using drugs and alcohol as things to cope and get by with the situation, as would be typical of the genre. However, it's not exactly clear what's going on at any given moment once again. But I think there's a sense of relatability that shines through when everything's a little bit more abstract. You can interpret your own meaning from something like that. Throughout the years that it's been released, I have found myself returning to this album to deal with any kind of negative emotions that I might be feeling, just because there is some inherent relatability in the way that it's written. The less descriptive elements, mixed with the more blunt lines that are placed throughout, make for a duality that's entirely relatable. Whether that be intentional or not, it's honestly a little bit hard to say, but whatever it is, it works very well. His songwriting on the surface could definitely be interpreted as basic, but there's a lot below that surface level. To bring up some favorite lyrics, we have on Bad News, I'm actually going to bring two. The first one, if you pop me in my face, please spare the better side, is one of the most immediately noticeable lines to me, at least. I think the, again, bluntness of this one really shines through, but it's still somewhat of a strangely poetic idea of still maintaining your looks if you are dead, I guess. Next one is barely a time that I could share with others, bought a new table just to skip supper. So this one really brings some relatability as far as I'm concerned. Again, it's something pretty simple and down to earth. Sayonara brings us some of the best lyrics overall. There's just a lot of great writing on this one. The hook brings us promise that I will stay out of reach, far gone cause that shit still bothers me. This is a great moment of being a little bit more abstract with things, and you could take this a variety of ways, but I like the way that it comes across, especially in context of the song. A very simple phrase is $$ rewind, used in the bridge of this song as well. I think there's so much you could take away from just these three words repeated on their own. It brings to mind someone just going to work and putting in their time and not really having a lot else. It's just making money and then going back to it. On Deity, we get the line, only thing that I beg for is your pardon, and I think this is just a clever way of phrasing it. Playing with the phrase I beg your pardon in such a way is pretty clever, I think. Race car brings us body bag, probably glad, had that price on my head. So there's a little bit of a double entendre there. And I think there's a lot that you could pick apart even in such a simple phrase once again. Mostly just in the body bag, probably glad part. So this is saying that someone might be glad that he's dead because body bag would imply that you have died, but then glad is a brand of trash bags, and I think that was an intentional reference there just because it seems like a very insignificant way to body bag someone, maybe a little bit of a moment of self-critique or self-loathing in a way. The entire idea of carousel is a really great one. This seems to be a relationship that's just stuck in a vicious cycle. We can bring out the actual title on this line, carousel on the same ride, we're on the same ride. Essentially just repeat it a little bit there, and that brings forward the entire themes of the song pretty well. I just think that this one's pretty beautifully written for what it is. Santa Monica's bridge section is hate piles in my memories, fake smiles all it ever is, take cover no letting be, hard to stay silent. I think that shows us a pretty vivid set of emotions, pretty brutally. Ending the whole album on the line leave me outside is a perfectly bittersweet and sad moment to end on as well that I think I should mention. Moving into our track-by-track section, we have the first one here, Bad News. This track works so well as an opener because it's so solid, shows us all of the ideas and the best side of them that we get on the album, and at this point, it's just iconic. The hook is incredibly catchy. Aries' flow across the whole thing is very smooth. It's poppy, and it just has a gripping quality to it. The instrumental samples some smooth piano keys as well as some relaxed guitar that then contrasts very hard with the banging 808 beat, but really shows us both the emo side and the trap side. When it's all put together, it's such a perfect package and something that becomes so fun to listen to. This song is nearly 3 minutes, but it only feels like one. Track 2 is Sayonara, and there was a significant stretch of time in my life in which I would have definitely called this my favorite song of all time, and it's still a contender. The fact that he has a video called How I Made a Hit Song with a Trash Beat, where he is producing Sayonara and showing how he did it, at least, shows how incredibly skilled and talented he is, that he's able to kind of dismiss an instrumental like this, because the distorted organ sample as well as the guitar used on the track are just imprinted in the back of my mind forever. This is genuinely one of my favorite beats that I've ever heard. One aspect that makes the song even better, besides the writing that we already brought up, is the incredibly catchy hook and flows that he has across the whole thing. It's really bringing us some of that pop appeal. It's just melodically flawless as far as any of my tastes span, and I would say that this is emo rap, if you even wanted to put it in that genre, taken to its point of perfection. Track 3 is Deity, and it's another one in this fiery opening 3-track run, as well as a single. It has an instantaneously likable quality, as a single should. This is what I would call the most alternative song on the album, due to the emphasis on guitar, the gravelier delivery of vocals, and the alt-rock-like chorus. Related or not, you decide, but I more recently found out that Aries is heavily influenced by Linkin Park, and I have to wonder if the choruses on Linkin Park songs ended up influencing what he did on Deity here. Whether it be subconscious or not, this alt-rock type direction is something cool to see him going down. While the previous track is the most alternative, I would say that Amy's Grave is the most emo, and it always has been a favorite of mine from the beginning for that reason. Right from the title and consequentially the lyrics, we can see that this is easily one of the most depressed songs on an already somewhat depressing album. What seems to be a distorted vocal sample used percussively in conjunction with some spacey sounds really just make for a moody beat. And the "why should I care what happens to me" refrain is one of the most brutally emotional moments, despite it not being necessarily a favorite lyric for me, but it really brings together the introspective moment that it is. Race Car, track 5, has become somewhat of a fan favorite with time. It isn't one that I really remember being mentioned much when the album came out, but it seems to be a favorite at this point, and it's pretty clear to see why. The instrumental on this one is more distorted, spacious, and layered than many of the others before it were, and it makes clear room for the sound effects that are occasionally implemented. The writing on this one seems to be one of the most well-defined and clear-cut concepts, where it seems like Aries is talking to someone who has dreams of living a lavish lifestyle but does not have the money to do so, hence the race car in the title. Track 6, Pony, doesn't necessarily hit us with any new ideas that weren't already used on the album, but I think they're used pretty perfectly. I wouldn't call it monotonous due to the quick and snappy nature of it. Aries has some of his faster and more rhythmic flows on this song, and it makes for somewhat of an anthemic feel at those moments. And although it is pretty similar to Deity before it, I have to really give some props to how guitar was implemented into the beat. I find it so hard to pick favorites when I'm talking about Welcome Home, because Carousel has also spent a fair bit of time being my favorite. I've already spoken on how I really love the lyrical theme and idea this one brings forward, but a particularly great element of the track is the production of it, as I suppose you would probably expect. Aries has a whole video going into the production of this one as well. However, he seems to be complimenting his work much more so on this one, talking about how it has over 100 layers. It's pretty impressive for sure, and it really shows with the incredibly immersive feel that this one has. This is another standout among Aries' discography as a whole, easily. Santa Monica is a track that rather than becoming instantly likable for me, definitely had to take some time to grow on me. There's another alternative type vibe going on with this one, with another heavy guitar emphasis direction with it. It may seem like a somewhat simpler version of Deity for that reason, but that simplicity is something I've found appreciation for with time. The chorus on this one feels much more depressed and dejected than much of the choruses on the earlier part of the album, and it does a lot to usher in a bittersweet vibe that seems to be the beginning of the closure to the album that is then solidified on a more bittersweet note with the 9th and final track, Home, a semi-title track. This is the longest and most introspective song on the album, and it makes for an emotional peak that really brings a climactic moment to the album and feels like it has a lot of closure. I feel like I'm just hearing him pour his heart out over what has to be one of the most creative and adventurous instrumentals on the whole thing. I find it amazing how there's only 24 minutes of music on here, and I'm still able to talk at such length about it. I also find it impressive that there's so little music actually on the album itself, and yet it has become such a huge staple in the actual music taste that I've developed from the point of 2019 in which I first listened to this. It has been pretty much in heavy rotation ever since. I mean, Aries doesn't really fall out of my rotation ever. He's clearly one of the most talented producers and songwriters in this genre that, again, was already becoming pretty oversaturated at the time. And it's so clear that he has so much skill and talent on Welcome Home. With how effortlessly everything seems to click into place, it seems like you could almost make the assumption that he just stumbled into making something near perfect. But it's clear that he's just really skilled and dedicated to his craft. Whatever the production process may have actually looked like for this album, it seems very clear to me that this might be the most well-crafted moment in the entire genre's run that it had. And honestly, I feel like this album, although it has plenty of fans, really deserves a little bit more credit for being so genre-defined. Seeing his progression up to this moment was a very impressive moment, and I've gotten some of my favorite songs ever out of it, as I've already stated, and seeing him go to even higher heights from here has also been great. I'm very excited to hear what else Aries has in the works. Believe in Me Who Believes in You was also fantastic, although I haven't really talked about it here, and Snake Eyes is a great song too. So I would go ahead and actually just take a look at his discography as a whole. There's not a whole lot of length to it, but what's here is just so fantastic, and hopefully we hear even more from him soon. I'm very excited. So I hope you have enjoyed the video today, and if you have, go ahead and drop a like on the video. That would be greatly appreciated, as well as leave a comment down below telling me what you think of the album, or if you have any suggestions for other albums I should go ahead and give a listen to. Thank you so much for watching up until this point, and I will see you in the next video.